Hi and welcome to another video tutorial. In this video tutorial what I'm going to be doing is showing you how to read and write to CSV files in Python. Now one of the good things about CSV files is that they're actually just really simple text files. So what we can do in Python is use exactly the same methods and functions that we use for reading and writing to text files with CSV files. So I can open my students.csv file in a spreadsheet program, and it will look like any other spreadsheet that I've got or in any other spreadsheet format. But if we open it in a text editor, it looks something like this. So we can see that all it is just a text file with commas separating the values that are put into the cells in the spreadsheet program. So how do we read a CSV file in Python then? Well, I'm going to show you a one way that we can read a CSV file now. So what I'm going to do is create an empty list, and the way I'm going to read it is I'm going to read the CSV file into memory and have each row of the CSV file being a list within this list called data here. So I'm going to start a try block, and I'm going to say my file is equal to open, and then I'm going to call the open function with the arguments students.csv and R for the read mode as my arguments for the open function, and that's going to return to me a file handle which I can use to read the CSV file. Okay, so that's the line which I'm going to use to open the CSV file and create a file handle. What I'm then going to do is use a for loop, and I'm going to use a for loop because what I want to do is iterate through each line of the file and add it to my list data. So I'm going to say for line in my file, where my file is going to be our file handle here, and line is going to be a variable which every time we go through the for loop, that line variable there will hold to the current line of the CSV file that we're on. And just to be clear then, that line variable there, I said it was going to be holding the current line of the file that we're on. It's going to hold that line as a string. So what we're going to do with each line as a string? Well, first of all, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to convert it to a list of all of those of the values that are separated by commas. So the way we do that is set up a variable to hold that list, so let's call it line list. And we're going to set that equal to line, and we're going to call the split method on line, and we're going to pass in a comma as a parameter into the split method. So if you call the split method, what it will do is it will return a list of each of these of a list of strings of each of the values separated by whatever you pass in. So if I had a string, say for example hello, and I called split on it and I passed in E, then it should return me a list of the character H as a string and the rest of the word hello. So that's why I'm using the split method here, because it will return a list of name, course, current score, and the same for all of these other rows in the CSV file. Okay, so what I'm going to want to do next is I'm going to want to take out the new line character at the end of the line. And if I know in advance how many columns my CSV file has got, I could use that, but if I want to create a general method to read a CSV file, what I'm going to want to do is say line list, and then call the len function, and pass in line list as a parameter. This will return the number of items in line list, so in other words, how many columns my CSV file has got. I'm going to want to do that -1 to get the position in line list where my last value in that row of the CSV file is stored. And then I want to call the replace method. I'm going to set this equal to itself, but I'm going to call the replace method on it. And what the replace method does is it allows us to pass in two parameters. The first parameter is the thing that we want to replace, so the new line character. And I want to replace it with nothing, so I'm just going to pass in an empty string there as the second parameter. What that will do is it will change the last item in our list representing that row in the CSV file, and it will remove the new line character from that item, because we're assuming that we don't want to, when we're manipulating the CSV file data in our Python application, we don't want to be also manipulating the new line character, because that's not going to be part of our data. So that's why I've done that. All that's left to do now is we've got our list, we've done some, we've got our data from the CSV file, we've done some formatting on it to get it into a list of that row of data. All that's left to do now is add it to our list. So we say data.append and then line list. Okay, so that would work on its own, but we've only got these lines of code here would work on their own. But we want to do some exception handling to handle the case where students.csv file doesn't exist. So we say except and then IO error. And then we're going to print couldn't read CSV file. And that informs the user what went wrong. Then in our finally block, we're going to say if the file handle is still in memory, close the file. Okay, and then just to make sure that it's worked, we're going to print data, so we can see our list of lists, which should have all of the data from our CSV file in. So just to remind you what data is in our CSV file, this is what it looks like at the moment in our text editor. So when we run the code that I've just written there, what we should get is a list of lists, and each list within the large list is going to contain one of these rows. So it's going to be a list of strings. The first, for example, if we take this row, the first string is going to be that name, the second string is going to be course, and the third string is going to be current score. So let's see what happens when we run this code. Okay, so that's what we get. We get a list of lists, and each list contains the name. We've got the first list, which contains the column headers, and then each list after that contains the name of a student, the course that they're doing, and their current score. Okay, so that's how we can read a CSV file, and what you'll notice is that, what you will have noticed by this point is that it's very much like reading a text file, except we just have to do a bit of manipulation here to get the data in the form that we want. But it's not much more complicated than reading a text file. What I'm going to do now is convert this code into a function so that I can use it later easily. Okay, so I've converted that code into a function, and all it does is, by function, when I call it read data, we'll take one parameter, the file name, and then I've just, instead of hard coding the file name into where I call the open function, I've just used the variable file name that I'm passing into the function here, and then my function returns the list that we create, so it returns data. So what I'm now going to do is show you how you can write data to a CSV file, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to create a function to add a student record to our CSV file. So my function add record is the same as the read data function in terms of the number of parameters it takes, apart from the fact that we're going to want to take another parameter, because we don't just want the file name in this case from whatever's calling add record. We want the data that that's the calling part of our program wants to add to our CSV file. So we want Let's call it row data. So we take our add record function takes two parameters: the name of the file that we want to add some data to, and the data that we want to add to the file. So first of all, then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the new line character back into the last element in the list of data that we want to add to our file. And that's the line of code that I'm going to need. What that basically says is change the last element in our list of data that we want to add to the file from being what it is at the moment to being what it is at the moment with a new line character on the end. The next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to add in the commas back into the data so that we could open the file in another program that handles CSV files, for example, a spreadsheet program. So to do this, I'm going to use a for loop. Okay, so I've written this for loop here, and what this basically says is for every item in our list row data that we want to add to the CSV file, providing it's not the last item in the list, add a comma to the end of the item. So that will add in all the commas that we need for the CSV file format. And finally then, all we've got to do is write the list to the next row of the CSV file. So I'm going to open the file in append mode because I don't want to wipe the contents of the file, I just want to add some data to the end of the file. And then I'm going to call the writeLines method on the file handle, and I'm going to pass in my list row data. And what this will do is it will write the contents of row data onto the next line of the CSV file. And you can see my tutorial video on writing to text files to see more about the differences between the write method, the writeLines method, and just using the print function to write data to a text file. Then we need to just handle the case where there's an IO error. Then in the final block, we're just going to close the file like we did here, and we can just use exactly the same code as we did here because we've given our file handle the same name. Okay, so that should be our code for writing data to a CSV. Let's see how it works. Test these functions out at the shell. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to test out read data. So I'm going to print the return value of read data. It's expecting file names. I'm going to say students.csv students. And what this should give us is the list of lists that we saw before with all our data from students.csv. And we can see that it's done that there. So that function works. We're expecting it to work because we tested the code inside the function. We're just converted it into a function. Now we're going to add some data to the CSV using add record. So let's call add record with students.csv as the first argument, and a list containing, let's say, Steve, who's doing French, and he's got 60%. So we're going to try and add that list of data to the CSV file using add record. Do we run that? And then to test that it's worked, we're going to print the contents of read data again. Okay, so we can see that that's worked there because we've got the last list in our list of lists is the data that we just entered in there. And we can have a look at the CSV file in the text editor, and we can see that the data was added to the CSV file there. Okay, so that's the end of this tutorial video. I hope you found it useful, just giving you an overview of the fact that you can use the same methods and functions to read and write data from a CSV file as you can to a text file, because a CSV file is just text. And thanks for watching.